If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to you or someone you know? My grandmother was always irrationally afraid of dogs. She liked them, but they made her nervous because they were too messy, loud, and unpredictable. She would always tell us not to leave the door open on nice days. Close that door. A big black dog might walk in. She had this fear that one day she'd turn around and there'd be a big black Labrador slobbering on her floors. We always laughed at her oddly specific fear. And we knew everyone who lived nearby, and their dogs. The biggest, blackest dog within 1 mile of her house was a Yorkie, so her fear was unfounded. Anyway, years later, my grandma passed away. My dad and I had the sad task of clearing out her house. Things were a bit stuffy, so we left the door open to the yard and got to work. After a while, we both hear a strange noise and look up. It sounded like panting? We turned around, and, I kid you not, there was a big, black Labrador sitting in the middle of the kitchen. Just gazing up at us happily, drooling on Grandma's linoleum. Just like she always said would happen. We lost our shit uncontrollable laughter, crying just a little. Gave the dog scritches and escorted him back outside. My dad shut the door, looked upwards, and said, "Sorry, Ma. You were right. She just had to be proven right one last time." When my mom was a kid, late 60s, she would always wake up at 3:39 a.m. This went on for months. One night, she woke up to what she described as a figure in her bed, but it was slender and silver, almost metallic. Frozen in fear, she yelled, and the figure popped up and dashed out of the room. The next thing she heard was a mirror breaking in the hallway near the stairs, which woke up her parents and brother. They came out to find broken glass all over the floor and asked what happened. My mom describes what happened. Everyone lay silent after the end of her story. They didn't have a mirror in the hallway. My mom's whole side of the family was raised Catholic. They all went to the same church in a small town in the south. I was there one summer as a kid with my mom. I was maybe 10 years old. My uncle's farm land backs right up to the church. Anyway, things haven't been going so well on the farm. Crops not growing right, healthy animals randomly dropping dead, chickens and small creatures showing up gutted even though he had a donkey to protect his cattle, just weird SHT that's never happened before. So one day, the adults are acting super weird and cagey. You know how they act when something big is going down but they don't want to scare the kids? Like that. My grandma, mom, uncle, aunt, some older cousins, and the priest and another man from the church are all hanging out on my uncle's farm, and they basically kicked me out of the house to go play. Naturally, being a very curious kid, I climb as high as I can in the nearest tree to the house, trying to eavesdrop. I hear a snippet of conversation here and there but can't figure out what they're up to. Everyone leaves the house, following the priest to the barn, stables, chicken coop, etc. This entire time, I'm watching from the tree. While they're all down at the stables, I hear the door to the house open, and a woman I've never seen before, maybe 30 years old with brown hair and a blue dress, casually walks out the door. She briefly looks up at me in the tree. I wave. She ignores me and walks off down the dirt road. Okay then. Once the adults are done with whatever they're doing, we all gather in the dining room of my uncle's house to have some lemonade my aunt made because it was such a warm day. I decide to pipe up and ask them who the woman in the blue dress was since I'd never seen her visit before. Every adult in the room freaks out. My aunt starts crying, the priest looks like he might barf, and I'm told the woman was just visiting. Okay, whatever. A decade later, my uncle finally tells me that the woman I saw was an apparition that had started appearing to parishioners at the church and next door on my uncle's land. They assumed she was a lost spirit trying to pass on, but after she attacked the priest at his house, also nearby, and farm animals started showing up dead, they decided she was some sort of demon who appeared as a young woman to hide her true nature. The day I saw her from the tree, the adults had gotten permission from the Catholic Church to perform an exorcism on my uncle's land. It appears I witnessed her leaving. I wonder where she is going. I'm 26 years old today, and the story of Evelyn, as the parishioners started calling her, she'd been spotted inside the church, still gives me goosebumps. She was completely expressionless when she looked up at me in that tree. Didn't seem in any hurry to leave either. The moment she was gone, the crops started recovering, and we stopped finding dead and eviscerated livestock. I'm not religious, and I'm generally a pretty big skeptic, but I'll never be able to explain what I saw from the oak tree that day. I fell out of a tree when I was a young boy, hitting several branches on the way down and hitting the ground hard. I was alone and wasn't found for maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I was heavily concussed, but I can clearly remember an elderly man in a dark suit with a dark hat standing over me while I lay on the ground. He was just looking at me the entire time and offered no help. Piercing eyes. He scared me. Some teenagers found me, and when I came to, there was no man in a hat. I asked them if they saw him, and they said there was nobody there. They stood me up and walked me home, and I just kept asking about this man and kept looking for him. Years later, I learned about the Hat Man, and now I'm convinced that I was close to death that day and that man was there to take me to the other side. Kind of like the Grim Reaper, I guess. I went hiking in the woods when I was still living in the US. We were renting a small house next to some hiking trails. The trails were well maintained, and the woods were pretty massive. Anyway, at that time, I was working on my PhD thesis and feeling pretty depressed. I had just experienced a terrible panic attack and decided a walk in the woods would help. So I took off and felt relaxed. The air smelled like wet grass after a rain shower, the sun was out, I could hear birds and crickets, etc. It was nice. Now there was a big main trail that would branch off into smaller trails. I always took the same smaller trail since I knew it well and was sure not to get lost. So, I made my way from the main trail to the small trail. As I kept hiking, the smaller trail would branch out again, and you could go either left or right. As I neared the fork in the trail, I saw a figure standing right in the middle of the fork with his back to me. He didn't turn around, and he didn't move except to sway side to side. He was wearing a brown jacket and a brown hat. I kept moving forward a little bit, thinking he would hear my footsteps on the leaves, gravel, or grass and turn around, but he didn't. I stood there and watched him, his arms straight by his side, swaying back and forth, and decided to book it. Something just felt wrong, you know? I started running and looked back, thinking he might have heard my running and turned around, but nope. Same position. I went back a few days later, and I was the only one on the trails. I probably could have just said something and asked what he was doing. But I'm a petite 20-something female, and something about the situation made me feel uneasy. One time I was out tent camping as a kid, and we kept hearing weird sounds coming from out in the woods. My dad went to investigate, and he said he found a bunch of empty bottles and a torn-up sleeping bag out there. I went out there to see for myself a little bit later, while everyone was busy, and heard these weird grunting noises. Although I was scared, I followed them to what I assumed was the filthy campsite my dad had found earlier. Nothing, just as he said, a torn-up, dirty sleeping bag and a bunch of bottles. I kept having this sensation that we were being watched or stalked for the next couple of days. I even started having nightmares about bears, monsters, and stuff. On our last night camping, I had this horrible dream about a bear coming into my tent and biting my feet. It was so vivid and realistic that I was paralyzed with fear. I woke up and realized the sensation was real. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the face of a filthy elderly hobo sucking on my toes. He ran off into the night, and I never really told anyone about it until now. This was about 6 to 7 years ago. I was dating some wild redneck girl who was all fire. One of her favorite things to do was go out late at night and drive to old cemeteries and graveyards. On clear nights with the moon out and shining, they really are an interesting sight. One night we were at one called Pointer Cemetery, up about as far north on Kentucky as you can be. It's something like 1 or 2 a.m., and it's one of those spectacular clear nights. The cemetery was built in such a way that the road going in curved and met back with itself, forming a circle. We drove in and tuned around, we were on a slight incline, and we reclined in our seats. We could see up out of the windscreen, we had a nice view of the sky. Well, we're conversing, but we hit a lull and we're just enjoying the scene when all of a sudden a bright orange light flares to life about 40 to 50 feet away from the car in front of us, slightly to the left. It looked like a large floating orb that was hovering about 10 or so feet in the air. It hung there glowing. Slowly, the light started getting bigger and was illuminating more of the cemetery in an expanding circle of pale orange light. I suddenly got the feeling of being very unwelcome, and then the light began to recede back in on itself and disappear. It all happened in maybe 5 to 6 seconds tops. I turned the car on and roared out of there. The girl claims it was white, I saw orange. She had a friend who was really into paranormal stuff, and that friend claimed it was an orb, some kind of spiritual stuff. White is a neutral or welcome expression, and orange is unwelcome. The girl claims she didn't feel unwelcome, I sure did. I was walking home one evening down the road I still live on when I got that horrendous creeping tremble between my shoulders and up my neck that I had only ever had when walking alone in a city. I was being followed by some creepy man, a whole different story. So I was looking around me, trying to figure out why I felt like this on a quiet country road in broad daylight. Finally, I noticed a figure across the field next to the road. Too far away for me to see any details, I just put it down to the farmer checking his crop and carried on walking. You know, kudos to my spidey senses for picking up someone so far away. It was right across a 20-acre field. I carried on walking. The feeling didn't go away, so I turned back to look over at the figure to see if they were still staring at me. I was getting pissed off by the thought that some weird guy was just watching me, even from that far away. This is where SHT got weird. The figure was now about 3 times closer than they were before, still just standing and watching. Okay, I think that's some pretty quick sprinting on their part. Too quick, particularly in waist-deep barley, but whatever. I look away again and pick up the pace a bit. I'm only half a mile or so from home at this point. I'm also cursing myself for leaving my phone at home because I really wanted to call someone to help. The feeling gets worse, and for about 200 yards, I don't look into the field. I just march on, determined to reach home. Finally, though, the feeling gets so bad that I stop dead and turn around. This figure, whatever the duck it was standing on the road about 50 yards back. Close enough to see details, of which there were none. It was just a shadow, from which I could see arms, legs, and a head, but no features. No shirt color, no face, nothing. In broad daylight. I study this figure for a moment before taking another step back. It just stays put, so I shouted something like, "Hey, can I help you?" And it doesn't move, so I turn around and book it the last bit home. I was wearing riding boots, too, which are a witch to run in, so I was skidding and sliding all over. When I reached my door, I took a quick look behind me. It was standing at the top of the driveway, watching me. I get in, slam and lock the door, and look out of the window. It was gone. When I was a kid, every night, just before I fell asleep, I'd have a vision. It's hard to explain, but it was like one movie frame. Weeks or months later, without fail, these visions would come true. I remember this particular one. The bookshelves in my classroom had moved outside, and my friend was smiling in a very specific way. I couldn't make sense of it. I hated sitting in the benches outside of the classroom, and why would the bookshelves move outside? It took a couple of months, and I didn't think anything of it when we moved the bookshelves outside for cleaning. I'd completely forgotten about the vision at that point. After lunch, my friend sat down on the benches outside the classroom, and I joined her. She looked at me, and everything aligned just as I had seen it in my vision. Each time it happens, I have this OSHT feeling. I wouldn't normally believe in destiny, but I can't explain seeing useless, inconsequential things ahead of time. It's not a superpower or anything, it's always one frame of a moment, and I never know how or when it will happen. I firmly believe in predestination now and that the universe has a way of making certain specific moments align. I still have these visions, but they aren't as frequent, and I shrug them off these days. I sound like an absolute crazy person writing this. I've never told anyone about these visions and never thought much of them since they never predicted anything interesting. This just happened to me recently. I like to go night fishing for a variety of reasons. The woods at night have never scared me. I like the solitude, you get the best fishing spots to yourself, and it's very peaceful. So I go to this little lake that is down a 2-track service road for about a mile. And then there is a barrier, so you have to park and walk the rest of the way. So I park my truck, walk about 500 feet to my spot, start getting set up, and then walk back to my truck. It had been raining, so the road was muddy and clear of tracks. My boot prints were very evident, and I specifically recall thinking, wow, it'd be easy as hell to track me in here since my prints are the only ones and super visible. So anyway, I fished for a couple hours, and I stupidly had headphones in while I was smoking, fishing, and chilling, and I was wearing a headlamp that was turned on the entire time. Then, around 1 a.m., I decide to go for a walk and check out the surrounding area, so I walk up the embankment about 20 feet to the service road, and almost immediately I see another set of tracks that weren't mine. So some dude walked basically right past me while I was fishing, and there is no ducking way he couldn't have noticed me. But you know what the freakiest part was? Whoever left the tracks was ducking barefoot and had super long and creepy toenails like claws. I figured no one would believe me, so I took a bunch of pictures of the tracks. And then I promptly got the duck out of there. If horror movies taught me anything, it's that you just get the duck out when things seem weird as hell. When it first happened, I sort of laughed about it and thought it was weird, but the longer I think about it, the worse it gets. I mean, who the duck is walking around the woods at 1 a.m. with no shoes or socks and weird creepy toe claws? My friends asked, why the duck were you wearing headphones? But honestly, I'm glad I didn't have to interact with this mysterious stranger. When I was 15, we got a restraining order against my mom, and my dad started his divorce process. Every night my mom would break in and steal weird shit, Tupperware lids, forks, weird shit, and she would stand outside my brother and dad's room and talk at them. She was never at my door or in my room. It was terrifying for them and me. The crisis center provided us with surveillance cameras, but we couldn't catch her on them. The police never saw her, so they wouldn't do anything. Anyway, to the unexplainable part, I would pray every single night that she would leave them alone. I prayed with everything I had that they would be safe. It didn't work. Every night, she came in and did it all over again. I decided, duck it. Praying isn't working, so I'm done with it. The night I didn't pray, I woke up to her staring at me and smiling. Except it wasn't her. Not physically. I could tell it was her, but the thing in my room looked nothing like her. The only thing I could think of to do was say a final Lord's Prayer internally because I was sure I was about to die. She ran out of the house. Now you could easily say it was a coincidence that she got into my room that night or even that I was dreaming, and I wouldn't fault you for your opinion. This story is a hard one for even me to swallow, and I don't share it lightly because I know how insane it sounds. But it's been 13 years since that happened, and I remember every detail of it, from what she looked like to what she sounded like to the smell, the sounds, and the general feeling of doom, pain, and terror. I will always remember it, and I will always be afraid of it. Many nights of my childhood I felt someone twirling my hair when I was falling asleep. I always chalked it up to myself doing it because I had a habit of doing that same thing, and maybe I just didn't do it consciously. After a couple years, however, I knew it wasn't me. One morning, my eldest brother was looking at me really funny all through breakfast. I finally asked why he was staring at me. He shook his head and said nothing but looked so shaken. He later told me a shadow man was sitting at the head of my bed, playing with my hair, the night before. It scared him, and of course it scared me. He had weird details, like how he wore a top hat, but it was all shadow. Considering this had happened for years, I believed him then. I felt my hair moving when I wasn't doing it myself. I had to just go along with it and live my life. It stopped as I approached 10 years old or so. Still, it creeps me out. If my brother hadn't looked so shaken and pale, I would have thought he was just picking on me to scare me. My daughter woke me up a couple years ago, saying she saw a shadow man in the living room who wore a big hat. I'm damned if I didn't get reminded of my little visitor. My first thought is to brush it off since I don't believe in SHT like that, but it still can creep me out when it comes up. My church used to do something called family camp. Basically, a bunch of families from the church would go camping together. It was a ton of fun. This took place when I was 8 to 10 and I was sharing a tent with 3 of my friends. I've verified all of the following with people who were adults at the time. There had been a lot of bear sightings in the area, so they set up a giant bear trap right in the middle of the campground. It was a large metal cage with a dead deer dangling from the top of it. My friends and I all thought it was weird as hell. That night, my friends and I were all snoozing away when all 4 of us were woken up by heavy padding sounds, some soft grunts, and a terrible smell right by the tent. We all sit up straight and stare at each other in the dark. We're all terrified that it's a bear. Within seconds, we hear the giant cage start to rattle, and then the same smell and sounds pass by our tent again. We sit there for probably about 30 minutes until one of my friends pokes her head out of the tent. "The deer is gone," she whispered loudly. The next morning, the deer were in fact gone, and the cage didn't spring. There were no drag marks or anything to indicate a bear had come and dragged it away. Something or someone had to have lifted it without springing the trap and carried it away. We told one of my friend's moms about it, and she woke up in the middle of the night too and heard it. It's been over 15 years, and all 5 of us remember it very clearly. Story number 2. I was driving at around 10 p.m. in Oregon's desert, so visibility was pretty damn good. As I drive around a corner, I see up on the right-hand side of the road what appear to be floating candles. I stare as I get closer, and I see they're too high up to be held by anyone, and I don't see anyone around. I think it might be like those Chinese lanterns, which I love, so I pull over to take a picture. As soon as I put my car in park, I get my phone camera ready to go, and by the time I look up again, the floating candles have disappeared. This happened to me about 3 years ago. I was coming back home late at night, and as I was driving, I just happened to glance at the time, and it was exactly 12 a.m. when I looked back at the road. I saw a big animal shadow at the next light, just walking across. Because I live in the south, I thought it was just another deer, which I've seen plenty of to not get them confused with anything else. Well, as I get closer to it, this shadow thing decides to stop in the middle of the road, and when I got right in front of it, I wasn't even 10 feet away from it. I saw what it was, and the only way I can describe this thing is, it was a big giant wolf. When I say giant, I mean it was as big as a horse. Again, I was right in front of it with my car, so the lights were hitting it and it was hitting its face too. When that happened, the wolf and I stared at each other, which is the weird part for me because I could clearly see its pupils. They weren't shining because of the light like any other animal. No, this thing had yellow eyes and black pupils, which again I could see clearly, and we just stared at each other for a good 10 seconds. After that I started moving slowly, but it took off as I started going forward. I looked back at it through my mirror, and whatever it was, it ran towards some woods across the road. I didn't feel scared, I just thought it was a really weird experience. I tried searching online for similar stuff, and the closest thing that I found to what I saw was a hellhound. Driving home from a night of sneaking with girls back in high school, we drove out to a place we had no clue where it was. I still had my Cinderella license, so we couldn't ask for help at 3 a.m. when our phones died. We took back roads for maybe an hour until we finally figured out we were about 30 minutes from my house. On the home stretch, there was a field at my old elementary school. We were cruising or something. I don't know what, but it wasn't an animal or a person. A large figure leapt out of the field, and the way it jumped, it would have hit the front passenger side of the truck. I slammed on the brakes and made some sort of scary noise. I collected myself for like 10 seconds. When I turned to apologize to my friend for slamming on the brakes, I started to say, "Sorry," I thought, but he cut me off with an uncomfortable look. "You saw it too?" We both panicked for a little while, trying to figure out what it may be, but came to no conclusions. We both sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, and I sped off. To this day, we talk about it and still have no clue what it may have been. Kind of haunts my dreams sometimes. My friend and I heard a rumor that there was a little haunted village, or clump of houses, in the woods north of town. We got some basic directions and went out there one night in his topless Jeep to check it out. To get there, we took a turn off the main road onto a dirt road and traveled about a mile through an open field until we hit some woods. Once we hit the woods, we went about another 100 yards, and the road went sort of right then left over some railroad tracks. As soon as the headlights came down over the railroad hump, we saw this guy standing in the dark. Just a guy standing still in the middle of nowhere wearing overalls. As we came around to the left, we spotted a few more people standing in the dark and a few kids all standing still like statues. Then we spotted a couple makeshift houses back in the trees, with a few more people standing nearby. Everyone was staring straight at us, but no one was moving. There were no lights anywhere, and there were no lights inside the houses. There were about a dozen people standing like statues in this area. The closest people were standing about 20 to 30 feet away with no top on the Jeep, so we're spooked, and my friend slowly backs us out of there, and we take off back the way we came. So the next day I'm explaining this story to a few girls I know, and they're super excited and want to go check it out. I'm still spooked and definitely don't want to go back, but I finally agreed to go see what's out there during the day. So we load up in my truck and head out there. It's a bright, sunny day, and as I turn onto the dirt road, I can see all the way across the field to where the woods start. As we get closer to the woods, it starts to get hazy and then turns into a thick fog all around us. Before I'm halfway across this field, I can't see anything, and I'm driving with my head out the window just to keep an eye on the edge of the road. I'm having so much trouble seeing where I'm going that I called it off and did a multi-point turn on this little dirt road in the fog and headed back towards the main road. As we're driving back, the fog starts to clear up, and when we hit the main road, I looked back and was able to see all the way to the woods again. No fog, a bright, sunny day. Those girls were sufficiently spooked, and I never tried again. I felt like something was protecting me or preventing me from going back in there. When I was about 12 or 14, I had an interesting experience while trying to go to sleep one night. The way my house was set up, there was only one hallway coming from the rest of the house, and you had to pass my room in order to get to all the other rooms and the bathroom. My door was always shut, and I used to listen to CDs with headphones to help me fall asleep. One night, while listening to music, I decided to take my headphones off and try to sleep without music. While getting situated, I glanced down at the foot of my bed, and there was a black figure standing there. It's roughly as tall as an adult man but completely covered in black. It looked like it was wearing a hood, and I couldn't see its face. Seeing it, I pushed myself up in bed against the wall and just stared at the figure. What was really interesting is that it didn't feel dangerous. I didn't try to approach it, it didn't reach out a hand, it didn't speak, it didn't make any noises, it just stood there looking at me. So I asked it, "Who are you? What do you want?" And nothing happened. It just stared at me for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes without doing or saying anything. It didn't feel dangerous or like it was going to harm me. I had this constant feeling that it was keeping me safe and that I should just go to sleep. So I did. That's all I remember. What's really bizarre is that, about 9 years later, something remarkably similar happens. By this time, I had moved out of my mom's house and was living on my own in an apartment. During this time of my life, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. You know, that whole what the duck am I supposed to be doing with my life at 21 conversation many of us have had with ourselves, and I was standing on my bed with this big piece of paper taped to the wall. I'm not really doing anything that important, I'm just writing down thoughts, ideas, and inspirational quotes. Again, I have my headphones in, and I'm just brainstorming away when I notice something out of the corner of my eye. It's important to note that my closet doors are full-length mirrors, huge mirrors, so that from where I was standing, I could see all of my room behind me. Well, out of the corner of my eye, while taking a moment to see what I've written down, I see the same figure standing at the foot of my bed again, watching me go through my process. So I glance over at the mirror, over my left shoulder, to see if I was seeing things, and I can see that the figure is looking at me. While I'm looking at it in the mirror, it turns its head to the left to look at me. We make eye contact. I'm suddenly filled with this heavy tingling sensation, and I turn my head back around to look at the wall where I was working. I spent the next few seconds trying to process what I just experienced and decided to turn around to see if the figure was still sitting there, but it wasn't. There wasn't anything there. What the duck is this figure, and has anyone else seen it? I want to see it again because I want to talk to it. I have questions, and I feel like it's watching me for some reason. One night, when I was about 16 years old, I swear I glitched into the Matrix or something. I'd finally decided to get off my computer and go to bed, around 2 a.m., if memory serves me correctly. At that time, my family and I lived in a decently sized 2-story house. The staircase to the second floor was pretty basic: head up a few steps, turn on a landing halfway up, traverse the remaining few steps, and at the top, you're only a couple of footfalls from my bedroom door. Someone please explain to me, then, how I got lost on this ducking staircase. Sure, it was dark, but even then, you'd have to be a special kind of stupid to not know how to walk up these stairs after you've already done it 1,000 times before. Just keep one hand on the railing, and you don't need to use your eyes. I swear that as soon as I reached the landing, I spent 10 minutes just walking upwards. Realistically, it only takes someone 5 to 7 seconds to walk up these stairs, or 3 if they're running or skipping steps. I realized I'd been walking for much longer than that, stopped, and immediately felt uneasy. I'd walked up those stairs in pitch black darkness so many times before, but even with my hand on the railing, I was getting nowhere, just endlessly walking upwards. My ducking skin crawled. If my brother hadn't turned on the upstairs hallway light, I'm not sure I would have made it to my bedroom. Guy blinked sleepily at me and asked me if I was okay, and all I could say was, I legitimately have no idea. Told him the next day what had happened, and he told me that the reason he'd come out of his room in the first place was because he'd heard footsteps on the stairs for several minutes. What the duck, man? What was that? I wasn't so tired that I just mindlessly walked up and down the stairs for a while. I was completely awake, and not once did it suddenly feel like I'd turned around to walk back downstairs at any time. I still get chills thinking about it. So this happened probably 5 years ago. I was asleep in my room when my eyes suddenly opened at about 2:30 a.m. I was wide awake. Like wide awake. My senses were heightened, and it felt like someone or something was in my room. In the darkness, I saw an outline of something underneath my desk. It was almost like a really tiny man, maybe a foot tall, give or take. At this point, I'm totally perplexed but not really scared until I see it start to move out from under my desk and across my room. The light switch is right next to my bed, so I decided that in one motion I was going to turn on the light switch and jump on this thing the second it got near my bed. This thing gets near my bed, but I ducked up and fumbled with the light switch and missed when I dove at it. But, I watched this ducking thing through my bedroom wall. I just sat on my bed, trying to figure out what the duck happened. Now, my brother had the room right next to mine, right behind the wall this ducking thing went through. About 10 minutes later, my brother knocks on my door and comes in. The first words out of his mouth were, "Did you happen to see like a little tiny human in here a little bit ago?" I was pretty shocked, and I told him that I indeed had. He replied, "Well, I just watched something dart across my room, and it looked like it came from the wall, and then it disappeared through the wall and outside." To say I was stunned would be an understatement, but I was also thrilled that I didn't have psychosis. I was out at night helping my mate, who was doing filming classes, with some bits and bobs, setting up, etc. We were filming an old, run-down shed that was occasionally used by homeless people for some horror project he was working on. There were 4 of us going all together, and we were all around 17 to 18, I was in 6th form. Anyway, it's in the middle of the woods at night, and I wasn't sure how long we'd be there, so I packed a drink, some snacks, and this weird combination radio and torch. The radio had never worked, ever, even when new, but the torch was good, and it was the only torch I had on hand, so I packed it. I meet up with the others, and we trudged through the woods towards the old shed. We were walking for about half an hour, and I realized how quiet it was in the background. Other than our talking, there were no sounds whatsoever, no nature sounds, nothing. We get to the shed and start setting up, and one of the other guys mentions how quiet it is, and all of a sudden we hear what could only be described as a pig squealing, before the radio on the torch comes on at full volume with static and a foreign language for about 10 seconds and then goes off again. Then silence again. We quickly filmed what we needed and booked it out of there. I had never been able to get the radio on the torch to work before or since then, and I had long since lost it. It still freaks me out how quiet it was that night. I was 11, and it was a summer night. The thing was, I grew up in a village, and it was common for folks to stay outside until late at night because it would be windy outside. ACs were unheard of. So me, my sister, my parents, my 2 aunts and her friends, and my grandparents were in the front of the house, sitting and having conversations. Mind you, it was a typical village in a developing country. Electricity would go off without warning, and that night was no different. All the houses went dark, and then suddenly we heard laughter and cheers coming from nearby. From the voices, we could make out that there were kids and women involved in whatever party was going on in there. Weird. My 2 aunts and her friends decided to walk and investigate what the celebrations were for. Since it was a tiny village, they sure would have known if there was a party somewhere. I decided to walk with them since there was no electricity, and even though it was a windy night, I wasn't sleepy, so I trailed along. As we were walking, the voices grew louder and more distinct. Apparently there was a fishing party nearby. We could hear splashes. I could see my aunts were terrified, and so was I. The road was covered in tall bamboos, and I had heard stories, so I was preparing to run if something bad turned up. As we were walking past houses, we realized the voices were from the cemetery. Now it was the village's cemetery, and it had a pond where the villagers would sometimes go fishing. We could see lamps and shadows of people holding buckets and a man throwing a fishing net. My aunts decided they would go and join the fishing party. So we walked to the cemetery, which was walled up and covered in trees and bushes. I wanted to run home, but since there were adults, I was less scared. The spooky thing was that the voices could be heard up until the point we reached the cemetery gate. But when we reached inside, it was pitch black, and all we could see was an owl hooting. We ran as fast as we could, and that night the 5 of us huddled in one room despite the heat. I still can't explain what the duck happened that night. There was one time I went camping with 2 of my buddies, but neither of them are real outdoorsy types. I was just kind of getting them into the whole camping and hunting scene. Now, I love hiking. Exploring, more like, because I hate just walking a trail. You're seeing nothing new. So I took the 2 friends out there a ways and got them 2 miles from camp when they just wanted to go back. I said fine and showed them where to go on my phone, and I made them put a waypoint on the other little GPS thing I had to follow. I wanted to keep going, so I did so by myself. They wanted the pistol I had on me for safety reasons, leaving me to walk alone in the forest with water and nothing else. No big deal, I thought. I found a steep hillside with rocks all the way down when I was about 5 miles from camp and decided to go down. I followed the path at the bottom of this thing, which was at this point just a dry riverbed. I walked down, and it got steeper as I went further south. When I crossed a certain point, something just felt wrong. I started trying to look around for anything, but there was a huge log across the 2 hillsides, and when I crouched down to crawl under it, it felt like I was being watched. I looked up to my left and saw nothing. I looked around to see if there was anything in the middle of the riverbed, then looked up to the right. Huge black canine. It was too small to be a bear, but it looked like a wolf on steroids. That dog creature and I held glances for what felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Every passing moment made the feeling of dread worse. I moved backwards to get the hell out of there, and when I moved the wolf thing, I just booked it into the forest, further from camp. The walk back was eerie. It didn't feel as much as I was being watched, just the feeling that it will catch me eventually. And that's why I don't ever hike alone anymore. When I was in elementary school, I went to school ridiculously early for swim practice. It turns out it was cancelled, and I only found out when I got there. That meant that I had the whole school to myself. I waited near the school gate, and soon enough, my homeroom teacher arrived. I greeted her, saying, "Hi, Ms. Grace." Here's where it gets weird. She ignored me and walked past me. Confused, I looked towards the gate, then back at where she was walking. Except, she wasn't there. I was a bit frightened at this point, so I went to wait outside my locked classroom, which happens to be next to the restrooms. I sat down on the floor. A few minutes later, I heard the eeriest, creepiest laugh coming from the restroom. It was really high-pitched, almost witch-like. It made my hair stand on end. I was so scared that I ran back towards the school gate. A few minutes later, my homeroom teacher, the one I had just seen earlier who ignored me and then vanished into thin air, passed through the gate. She saw me and greeted me. I was too freaked out to reply. Until now, I had no idea what on earth happened. It's the only paranormal experience I haven't been able to explain to this day. There was a house way back before Ghostbusters on the Sci-Fi Channel was a thing that my then boyfriend and our friends liked to go ghost hunting at. So this house has been abandoned for years, and the supposed backstory is that the man of the house went crazy and killed his wife and kids, and possibly his brother, too, with an axe. And in the house, on the second floor, there were holes in the walls where it looked like someone used an axe to get into rooms. Now that we'd gone there quite a few times, little weird shit would happen, no biggie, not worth writing home to mom about. Just cameras and flashlights not working. This was before cell phones really became ubiquitous. But one night we decided to go with a bigger group of folks, 10 people in all, instead of just 4 or 5 of us like usual, since one friend, Rich, had his van that could fit a small army that night. So we drive up. And we decide to break into groups of 2. 2 in the attic, 2 on the second floor, 2 on the first, ground floor, 2 in the basement, and 2 out in the dilapidated barn. Each pair is to spend about 15 to 20 minutes on their floor or area. My boyfriend and I end up on the second floor, so we walk up the stairs, and then this is where SHT gets weird. Almost literally. Now that I've been here about 10 plus times, I've checked out every nook and cranny. I know it like I know my own damn home. But suddenly, there's a room I've never seen before. It's a bathroom. With a huge claw-footed tub, and it connects between 2 bedrooms. I swear to all that is holy and unholy, I've never seen this room before. I have walked through the doors and the holes in the walls I mentioned earlier in all of these rooms. This room was not there before. And it's huge for a bathroom, too, not like I mistook it for a damn closet before. And I love claw-footed tubs, you can bet I'd remember such a sweet piece of antique porcelain. I freak out about then my boyfriend is trying to tell me it's always been here. Nope. 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 He's got to be ducking with me, right? He makes me stay in this new ducking bathroom for the whole 20 minutes, and I'm worried it's going to blink out of existence and take me with it. It doesn't, and we're fine. Nothing usual happens till we all meet back up, and we get shot at by who ducking knows as all 10 of us are next to the barn, so we book it back to the van and GTFO. But I went back later without the boyfriend or anyone else from that night, with some friends who had also been there before, and guess what? The bathroom is ducking gone. That is and probably always will be the most unexplainable thing I've ever personally come across. It's been 15 years since then, and if that house is still standing, I doubt it's still safe enough to find out if that bathroom is there right now or not. On August 16, 2008, my friend Kelsey died in a horrible river rafting accident. She was a beautiful, wonderful, bright light of a person who died at the young age of 23. Anyway, prior to her leaving on her rafting trip, she and I had bought tickets to the upcoming Radiohead concert on August 19 in Vancouver. She and I shared our love for Radiohead, and a few friends of ours were going to attend with us. Just before she left to go on her rafting trip, she and I were talking, hey, what song would you want Radiohead to play that you know they won't play? Her answer was Just, which is a song from the mid-1990s that is not on their set list anymore. I also asked her, what makes you like Radiohead so much? And she said Radiohead is music for a rainy day. On August 19, 3 days after her death, we still attended the concert because we felt it was something that she would have wanted us to do. We were all in the grips of grief, and I didn't really have the spirit to go, but I went anyway. We never gave her ticket to anyone, and we had the ticket torn at the gate because she was coming with us. It was a dry summer day, and 3/4 of the way through an absolutely awesome show, Tom York looks up at the sky and says, looks like we might get some of that famous Vancouver rain, let's play something for a rainy day, haven't played this in a while, so bear with us, or something close to that effect. On comes Just. A song they hadn't played live in forever. Music for a rainy day. It then proceeded to downpour for the next several hours. More rain than I've ever seen in August in Vancouver. The streets were flooded, and everyone at the outdoor show was completely soaked with warm summer rain. She came to that show with us that day, She made it rain, and I'll never forget it. R.I.P., Kelsey, you are sorely missed. My girlfriend at the time, her best friend, and I all went to San Francisco for the weekend. We stayed at this very old but beautiful hotel. They immediately upgraded us to a suite, which I was thankful for as there were 3 of us. Immediately upon getting to the room, we see that it's a corner room. Looking out of the peephole, you can see a painting to the immediate left, then there's a small hallway a few feet long that leads to a window and nothing else, and going forward, it's just another hallway in the hotel. The room is also connected to another room, but it's locked. It also, oddly enough, had a peephole, and when looking in it, the room had clearly been uninhabited for a while, and all that was left was a dusty old desk and a light. Okay, just some useful information. So right when we arrived, my girlfriend went to take a shower. She sets out the clothes she's going to wear that night, including these black beaded flip-flops and a teal tank top. She sets them on another chair on the other side of the living room section, and her best friend and I sit on the couch. As she's taking a shower, her best friend and I are in awe over her iPhone, as it was the first iPhone and they just come out a couple months prior. My girlfriend comes out of the shower and immediately starts yelling at us, saying, "What did we do with her tank top?" We are genuinely confused because we saw her put it on the chair, but it's nowhere to be seen. Soon, we all begin looking under furniture and in our bags, but it's honestly gone. She still doesn't believe us, but I mean, what can we do? So we go out to dinner, everything's great, and we come back, about to go out. So we all take showers, and everyone is kind of doing their own thing with makeup and whatnot. My girlfriend and I are in the actual bedroom area with the French doors open to the living room, where her friend is sitting on the couch on her phone. All of a sudden, we hear a firm knock on the door. Her friend is freaked out because she swears it came from the connected room, and there's no one there or on the door to the hallway. I go check it out, and as I'm checking it out, it immediately knocks again. So I start freaking out because it literally shook against my face, and we all run to the bed to hide, and I call the front desk and ask them if their maids are playing a joke. They confirm that this isn't a time when they'd be working, so no. Weird, but okay. Moving on to the next day. My girlfriend's shirt still isn't anywhere to be seen, but lo and behold, her treasured flip-flops are now missing, too. We're all pretty clean, so it would be easy to notice if something went missing. At this point, we're all kind of weirded out, but really, what can we do? As we're leaving, I tell the front desk that she is missing her shirt and flip-flops, and they assure us that their maids would never do something like that. So we come back and once again start getting ready to go out. What happens next honestly shakes me to my bones. We hear a huge bang on the door to the hallway. Not a knock, but a single bang. I wonder if it's a kid, and I immediately open the door. No one. The next rooms are so far away that there's no way they would have been able to hide. I looked in the little window too. I'm actually kind of scared now, but they just continue getting ready to get us out of there and stay out as late as we can so we can check out the next morning. On the other hand, I'm keeping watch through the peephole until they're ready to leave. About 10 minutes later, it happened again. A huge bang, right against my face. Only this time, it's accompanied by a shadow that's covering the painting right next to the door, and I watch it slowly move down the hallway. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it. At this point, I'm literally speechless, and I tell the girls what happened. We're all freaked out, and I'm like, okay, we're going downstairs now. So my girlfriend and her friend get their bags, and I open the door. What do I find sitting neatly outside the door? Her flip-flops. At this point, we start flipping shit and immediately go downstairs to tell the front desk. They all think we're insane, but whatever. The next morning, we packed our bags and drove back down to San Jose. We tell the whole story to our roommate, and she tells us to never stay in a corner room because it attracts negative energy. I brush it off and go to my room. I unzip my backpack, and what do I find on top of all my things? Her tank top. Honestly, this weirds me out to this day, and I have no rational explanation. My wife and I are avid backpackers, and we try to put down at least one 20-30 mile weekend trip every month with our ultralight gear. We're fairly experienced at this point and have had numerous semi-dangerous encounters with wildlife and other wilderness hazards. We don't get shaken easily. We're hiking a ridgeline trail in the late afternoon, planning to take a turn and head down into a drainage to camp near water before it gets dark. We've put down 10+ miles that day, and we're fairly beat. We're looking forward to setting up camp and getting dinner going. We see a guy coming up the trail towards us as we turn onto the drainage trail, wearing worn-out clothes. Up close, he's a white guy of kind of indeterminate age, somewhere between the late 30s and late 40s. We acknowledge each other and strike up a little conversation on the trail. The first thing I notice is his accent. It's clearly American, but it's not the accent of the area we're in, and it's kind of, well, old-timey. There's a kind of music or lilt to it, note, not a drawl. It's vaguely familiar, like something I've heard but can't quite recall. My wife is chatting with him while I puzzle out his accent, and then I notice he's covered with tattoos. Weird ones, too. I have ink, so I'm not one to judge someone just for having a tattoo, but I've never seen anything like these tattoos before. They're not standard hard-ass tattoos or pictures. It's almost like writing, but not in any alphabet I've ever seen, and arranged in a way that makes me think they're also a picture if seen in full, like a Magic Eye game made up of some indecipherable script inked on a man's skin. I'm now getting an itchy something is very wrong here feeling from this guy when I hear him say to my wife, "There's a great campsite down by the stream, lots of campers have used it." I realize that we're an hour from sundown and at least 10 miles from anything, and this guy has nothing with him. Not a backpack. Not a water bottle. No warm layer, it's autumn and we're rather high up, elevation-wise. Just the clothes on his back, none of which have anything distinguishing about them, no logos or visible brands of any kind, and are quite worn. He's about to get overnighted on the trail without any gear of any kind, and only one campsite is within 6 miles of where we're standing. I hear my wife say, "That's where we're going to camp, thanks for the suggestion." And he smiles at us. His teeth are pointed, I assume filed, and curved inward at the back of his mouth. I don't mean just his incisors, I mean his front teeth on both the top and bottom. I nod my agreement and say, "Enjoy the rest of your hike," and then we continue on. In another mile or two, we get down to the stream, and the campsite is lovely. Beautiful green grass about 3 inches high, flat, dry, easy water access. However, there's no sign that anyone has camped there in a very long time. As we're looking it over, we find there are a ton of stakes in the ground. You'll usually find a stake or two at high traffic campsites just because people forget them when they're packing up camp in the morning. We found more than 10 of wildly different ages and designs, some old school and rusty, others new and shiny. But none of the grass is bent or broken except where we've stepped in to check the site. Wordlessly, we both shouldered our packs and hiked another, thankfully flat and easy, 6 or 7 miles to the next site. I'm neither spiritual nor superstitious, and I've never had any other experience that filled me with a sense of unexplainable fear or impending doom the way this one did. I used to live on a rather remote farm in the middle of Norway. My home is located at the end of a fjord that will take you out to the sea and, after a while, to civilization and the big city. You can also drive into town in about 4.5 hours from my home. But this is more or less just to give you who read this a sense of scale. I have 2 neighbors about 40 minutes away from my home, but they are seldom at home, so I am for the most part alone with my dogs and farm animals, mainly sheep and a few pigs. Around my home, there are deep woods, and looming above them are tall mountains and deep valleys, overgrown by thick forest and heather meadows. I hunt these lands in the hunting seasons, but there are places I do not go due to the fact that they are remote, hard to get to, and such. But this year I have found myself pressed for income as the COVID-19 pandemic prevented me from having hunters come here to hunt deer, grouse, and moose. Now, this is relevant to my experience due to my reliance on these guests to keep my finances in good order. I was faced with the prospect of having to send all my livestock to slaughter and generally accepting my inability to keep the family farm afloat. I had, since my rather unpleasant experience in the woods as a 16-year-old hunter, made the following vow to myself: I would never hunt that stretch of the woods that belongs to the property that I now own. Having grown a lot older and far more calloused when it came to things considered odd or supernatural. So I got an extended quota for deer and roe deer, and having gotten this, I decided to use the profits made from selling the game to a local who sells to hotels and fancy restaurants in town. So on the last week of the deer and roe deer season before Christmas, I found myself deep into the high valley side amongst the heather meadows and sparse pine woods. I had left my pickup on the gravel road that ran along the fjord, and hiked up the valley side with my hunting dog and rifle in hand, looking for red deer. I had been on the move for about 3 hours when the weather changed. A thick fog rolled in and blanketed the terrain. I stopped and looked around while I got my compass out. That was when the first odd thing happened. My dog stopped dead in his tracks, and began shivering, as if cold, or, as came to mind shortly after, that he was nervous. His tail was tucked between his legs, and the shivering got more intense. Then, with a yelp that can only be described as one of sheer terror, he bolted down the steep valley side. I yelled and whistled in an attempt to stop him before he hurt himself. There are both bears, wolves, and lynx around where I live, and the addition of the odd invasive wild boar made me more than a bit worried. Raising my rifle a Springfield 30.06, slightly, I looked around in an attempt to see what had caused my dog to panic and flee. I called out to scare away any nearby animals or make any other hunters realize I was nearby. But the chances of any other hunters being on my lands are slim to none since I do not sell many licenses for red deer or roe deer. I got no response, and only the utter silence of the woods and meadows filled my ears. It was then that I heard the sounds of labored breathing and something resembling the odor of pine wood resin mixed with wet fur that was very filthy. Anyone who has worked with sheep who graze outside and has had the unpleasant job of handling said animals will know how wet, filthy, and unkempt wool will smell. At this moment, I felt a long-suppressed feeling of silent dread begin to creep into my bones. I started to back down the valley side, keeping a keen eye on the ground not only to not stumble but also to look for any signs of whatever was lurking nearby. I hoped it was just my mind distorting the common sounds and smells of the woodland. Having put some 500 meters behind me, the sounds and smells still hung around me. At that moment, I decided that I needed to warn whatever this thing was, so I raised my rifle and, in rapid succession, fired 4 shots into the air so as not to wound any unlucky critter. In my most nightmarish dreams, I could never have imagined the response I got, a deep guttural howl followed by what can only be explained as something of great height and weight making its rage known. A stone the size of a rucksack came hurling down, about 10 feet above my head, and landed with a great crash far down below. I am not ashamed to admit that, at this moment, I soiled myself as I ran like a whipped horse down the steep valley side. I dropped my rucksack and binoculars somewhere in that valley. The only thing I kept a firm hold of was my rifle. A primal instinct in me told me I needed something to defend myself with. Although what chased after me, screaming in primal rage, would not have been fazed by my gun, I doubt anything short of several 338 Win Mag rounds to the body would have done anything short of annoying it. I burst out of the woods along the gravel road and ran until I could taste a mixture of blood and bile in my mouth. Upon reaching my car, I vomited all over my boots and felt like my heart was about to explode from fear. I looked around to see if my pursuer was still after me or lurking around. But no stench of wet wool and fences hung in the air, except for my soiled pants. I shouted for my dog for what seemed like an eternity until my nerves caused me to climb into my car and drive as fast as I dared along the gravel road until I saw my home. Climbing out of my car and walking on legs that felt like they were made of gelatin. My heart nearly stopped when I saw my dog. He was a mess. Muddy, his fur thick with twigs and heather. His eyes were wide with exhaustion. I fumbled with my keys, unlocked the door, and let myself and my dog in. In the hours that came, I showered, cleaned myself up, and took care of my dog. But my mind and body were ravaged with fear. Every sound I heard made me almost jump. I did not sleep that night, and when my significant other came home, she commented on how worn out I looked and how equally strung out my dog was. This took place some weeks ago. Last week I was out with the garbage. When the smell of wet wool and pine wood resin filled my nostrils, I was lost for what to do. I will be damned if I end my days in the woods, but who knows? Time will tell.